Today's episode gives you a lot of insight in how to prepare yourself for a citizenship appointment at the Italian Consulate. I highly recommend for anybody who has a scheduled appointment at an Italian consulate to watch this video from beginning to end. Lucia gives a great insight into the whole process, what to expect, things not to do, and all kinds of situations that can arise in an application process. So without further ado, here we go. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in today. This is Laura Lee with Digging Up Roots in the Boot. And today I'm sitting down with Lucia Barbato, and she's going to share with us her experience in submitting her application with the Italian Consulate in Houston for Italian citizenship via Jure Sanguinis.
I hope this information about the Italian Consulate in Houston will help the next person who wants to go through the process. I chalked up my Italian citizenship application appointment to an outstanding experience with the Italian bureaucracy.
It's important to keep in mind that each consulate varies in its process of handling applications from beginning to end. So it's important that you go to the website for the consulate in your jurisdiction and read the information very carefully before making your appointment. Welcome, Lucia, and thanks for joining us today. The first question I have for you is, what made you decide to apply for your Italian citizenship in the first place?
Hello, Laura Lee. Thanks for inviting me. I'm very happy to talk with you about my experience of going through the Italian citizenship by descent application process. Well, it naturally seemed like the right thing to do after taking 2 trips to Italy and meeting and developing relationships with my cousins in Sicily and Campania. So I started on the path to Italian citizenship because I wanted to have a closer connection to my Italian family, and in the end, the decision came down to wanting to satisfy a deeper emotional connection to my family in Italy and to connect with my Italian heritage.
How did you determine that you qualified to have your Italian citizenship recognized?
Well, the first step in the Italian citizen application process was getting my last Italian-born relative's naturalization paperwork. I'm 100% Italian. Both my paternal and maternal grandparents were born in Campania and Sicily. This meant that I had 4 Italian bloodlines to explore. Unfortunately, I didn't have any of their vital records, and while I knew some facts such as their approximate birth, marriage, and death dates, I didn't have many of their vital records. So I had to research my grandparents' naturalization records online with the Family Search and Ancestry websites, along with the NARA and USCIS, to determine when they became U.S. citizens. I hope that at least one grandparent naturalized as an American citizen after my parents' birth. This is a key criterion in determining my eligibility for having my Italian citizenship recognized. Because if all of my grandparents had become U.S. citizens before my parents were born, then my parents would not have inherited Italian citizenship, and I would not be eligible to apply for Italian citizenship by descent, Jure Sanguinis. I wasn't able to locate naturalization records for 3 of my grandparents, but I found that my maternal grandfather petitioned for U.S. citizenship after my mother was born. That meant he was still an Italian citizen when my mother was born, so she inherited Italian citizenship through him. And since I was born after 1948, that made me eligible to pursue Italian citizenship by descent.
How did you get started on your Italian citizenship application?
To get started, I wanted to enlist in the consultative help of a professional. Since I worked with you, Digging Up Roots in the Boot, on 2 separate occasions, first for Italian civil and church document research, and then for 2 ancestry heritage tours, I contacted you again to help me. I let you know I wanted to start the Italian citizenship application process, and I also decided to use your document translation services. I also wanted to be very involved in the Italian citizenship application process myself, and at first I thought it was going to be easy, and all I had to do was get a few birth certificates to prove my lineage. Then when I looked at the list of required documents, there were a lot more documents than I had originally thought, so I started a spreadsheet to keep track of my progress. Additionally, since my son was a minor and I wanted to include him in my application for Italian citizenship, I thought I had plenty of time to include him in the process. I soon learned it was going to be a lot more time-consuming and challenging to obtain some of these records. So I got to work, crossed my fingers that my application would be ready to submit before he turned 18 in 14 months. Since I'm a resident of Texas, the Italian consulate in my jurisdiction is in Houston. Thankfully, you advised me to set up an appointment as soon as possible using Prenota online. That was good advice. I soon learned that setting up an Italian citizen appointment was not automatic. Before I could schedule the appointment, I had to go to the consulate website, register, log in, and as I recall, the system displayed a calendar with no appointments available, and they were booked 4 months in advance. So over several months, I had to log in to the Prenota website at different times of day, looking for an available appointment. Generally speaking, Italian citizenship application appointments become available at midnight Italy time. So by suggestion, I logged in about 5 minutes before 5 p.m. Texas time, which was just before midnight in Italy when the system releases new appointments. I began looking for an appointment in August, but it wasn't until mid-December that I was able to get one. So it took about 5 months of regularly checking the site before I was able to get the first available Italian citizenship application appointment. That appointment date was April 12th. And I had to be very careful in recording the appointment since the consulate website uses the European date format. So the April 12th appointment date was written 12/4 on the website. I had to read the date carefully to make sure that I booked my flight and travel reservations for April and not December.
Tell us about the Italian citizenship application forms.
The application I used was titled Application for Italian Citizenship, Jure Sanguinis, which meant blood right or by descent. On the Houston Consulate website, there are 4 downloadable application forms plus an AIRE or IRA registration form. Form 1 required information about my Italian bloodline, starting with my last Italian-born ancestor all the way down to me, the applicant, and my minor son. And that includes information such as names, city, and dates of birth, marriage, death, and naturalization. Form 2 is a list of all the places and dates where I had lived since I was 18 years old. Form 3 is a declaration of my living ascendant. Form 4 is a declaration of my deceased Italian ascendant. So it's important not to sign these forms ahead of time since they must be signed in front of the consular officer during the appointment. The last form to fill out was an IRA registration form, and that form is used to register you in your Italian comune as an Italian living abroad. The registration form is in Italian, and I needed assistance to fill it out. So I was grateful for your assistance in helping me correctly complete that form.
What documents did you need to present with your Italian citizenship application at the consulate in Houston?
After presenting the application forms, my identification, and my appointment payment, I needed to present more than a dozen vital records proving my Italian lineage, which is through my maternal grandfather, then my mother, myself, and my minor son. I needed documents from 2 Sicilian municipalities, state vital records departments from over a dozen different agencies in 7 different states, and I needed immigration records from the National Archives and the USCIS. First, I handed in my grandfather's naturalization certificate that was obtained from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the USCIS, with the original letter I received from the USCIS and the envelope. Next, I presented my grandfather's official birth record from Sicily, or the Estratto dell'atto di nascita. Since he was married to my grandmother, I also had to show her certified Italian birth record from Sicily. Then I was asked for my grandparents' marriage certificate. This was followed by presenting my parents' birth certificates and my parents' marriage certificate. Last but not least, I showed my records of birth, my first marriage, I had a divorce record, second marriage, my husband's birth, and my son's birth records. I also had an additional document called a Certificato di Nascita Negativo, or Certificate of Negative Birth, from my grandfather's hometown. You advised me to have this record on hand since there was a discrepancy between my grandfather's birth date on his petition for citizenship and his death record. The document would prove that no one else with my grandfather's name was born on the incorrect date. For For the U.S. vital records, it's important to obtain the certified long-form documents. The birth or marriage certificates you might have at home might not be the correct forms required for Italian citizenship. And also, you might not want to give your original documents to the Italian consulate. The consulate keeps all of the documents that you submit with your Italian citizenship application. They don't return any documents to you except the original certificates of naturalization. So when you order the documents, you must provide proof of your relationship with the record request application. And most applications can be downloaded from the Vital Records Department's websites. Then you can fill them out, send the applications by mail, and more often than not, I had to include a self-addressed stamped envelope and a payment. The order of obtaining the documents was important. For example, I first needed my long-form birth certificate from the Secretary of the Commonwealth Office in Virginia. Once I had that record, then I could order my mother's long-form birth record, followed by my parents' record, my parents' marriage record. I needed to have both my certified birth certificate and my mother's birth certificate in hand in order to request my grandparents' marriage record, as well as my grandfather's certified death record. So having a spreadsheet to keep track of my progress and the requirements made the process a lot easier. My mother was born in New York, so I ordered her birth record from the New York Department of State. Once I received her birth record, I could order my maternal grandparents' marriage certificate also from New York. My parents were married in New Jersey, so that document was ordered from the New Jersey Division of Revenue in Trenton. And while I was waiting for those records, I ordered my maternal grandfather's immigration record from the USCIS. That record took months to process, and I had some issues with that order, so I wish I had requested that document sooner. I ordered my mother's death certificate from the Florida Department of State, and I ordered my grandfather's certified death certificate from the state of New Jersey. Then I needed to obtain my certified abstract of marriage from the county in Las Vegas, Nevada. I didn't realize it at the time, but instead of ordering the certified abstract, I got a certified license. They are different. They're not the same thing. So fortunately, you caught my error, and I was able to order the correct document before my appointment at the consulate. The easiest record to obtain was my son's long-form birth certificate. All I had to do was drive to my local city office in Texas and make the request. All the rest required a lot more effort. So after speaking with you, I learned I also needed to get the divorce record from my first marriage, even though it had nothing to do with my son's bloodline. And since that document was over 30 years old, I had no idea where to order it, so I had to make several inquiries. And after many calls and waiting on hold for long periods, I finally found my divorce record in the archive for the Superior County Court of Los Angeles. I ordered it 2 months before my consulate appointment. And on top of that, I needed to order my first marriage certificate from the New Jersey Vital Records. Fortunately, I was able to order and receive that record online.
Which of your documents, if any, did you have to amend before your actual appointment at the consulate?
First started this process, I didn't even know that documents would need to be amended. I thought they would be all correct to begin with, and I was very wrong about that. Each correction required its own separate correction application form, and then the corrected documents had to be apostilled and translated. Each of those required submitting the applications with a fee and hoping you would receive those records back on time. The first correction I needed was to my first marriage certificate. My birth date was incorrect, so I had to locate and fill out an amendment form and send it in with the original incorrect document, plus return envelope and, of course, the fees. The second correction was to amend my mother's death certificate. The long-form certificate included her father's American name, which was Russell, and not his Italian name, Orazio, found on his immigration and birth records. So to correct my mother's death certificate, I had to submit an amendment application to the Florida Bureau of Vital Statistics to the attention of the corrections unit, so it would show her father's Italian birth name to match his birth record. For a third correction, you found a misspelling of my grandfather's first name on my parents' marriage record. It should have been spelled Orazio, O-R-A-Z-I-O with a Z, but it was incorrectly entered as Orazio with a C. So you suggested that I email the Houston Consulate. They replied that that wouldn't be a problem, but I got it corrected just in case. And I also found inconsistencies with the spelling of my grandfather's last name in the immigration document. The immigration document was changed during his naturalization process when two letters in his last name were reversed. But naturalization records cannot be amended. Fortunately, the original declaration of intent showed his name spelled the original way, and his petition for citizenship showed where his name was changed. Of greater concern were huge discrepancies between my grandfather's date of birth on his certified birth record, his immigration records, and his death certificate. His birth record showed 10 February 1907, but his immigration records had a birth date of 6 February 1902. But again, the NARA can't correct the naturalization records. And on top of that, his death certificate had a completely different month, date, and year of 23 May 1905. I was told that these type of issues aren't uncommon, but it was a big concern to me. Additionally, you pointed out that my grandfather's death certificate listed his American first name Russell instead of his given name Orazio. So on the death certificate, I had to contact the New Jersey Department of Vital Statistics to correct corrections to both his birth date and first name. Even after submitting exhaustive documentation, many phone calls, and an appeal, my request was denied. Instead, they advised me to obtain a one and the same person court order. I didn't have enough time to pursue a court order and deal with lawyers and trips to New Jersey. So I was very concerned that my application for Italian citizenship might be denied due to these discrepancies, and I was considering giving up my appointment at the Italian Consulate in Houston. So fortunately, I received some good advice from you to keep the appointment. You said that the consulate might allow me to submit some documents at a later time, since most of my paperwork appeared to be in order, and you were right about that. So at this point, I was finished as much as possible with my documents and corrections, and I continued to prepare for my consulate appointment.
Which documents did you have to translate when you presented your application?
Well, let me start with what doesn't need to be translated. I didn't need to translate records that were already in Italian. These records included my grandfather's and grandmother's birth records from Italy. I also did not need to translate my grandfather's naturalization records. And since I was applying for Italian citizenship through my mother, I did not need to translate my father's birth record. I also did not need to translate my husband's birth certificate. I was required to translate all other vital records in my direct bloodline from English to Italian. Initially, I needed 8 documents translated, which included my grandparents' marriage certificate, my mother's birth certificate, my parents' marriage certificate, my birth, previous marriage, divorce decree, current marriage certificate, and my son's birth record. When I had the majority of the documents ready, I sent them back to you for translation about 2 months before my appointment. The consulate website has a link to a list of translators, but you aren't required to use them. Also, the corrected documents had to be translated. Thank goodness you caught several errors which allowed me to get those corrections made before my appointment. So after my appointment at the consulate, I needed 4 more documents translated. Due to my son's fast approaching 18th birthday, we agreed it would be faster to use one of the local translators on the consulate list for the last few translations, but I had a disappointing experience with the local translator. And then after my consulate appointment experience, I knew the administrator was very meticulous when reviewing my application. So when I received the last few translations from the local translator, I decided to check them carefully before sending them to the consulate. And I was very disappointed to find a misspelling and several omissions on my own birth certificate. Then on my marriage certificate, there were 3 translation errors in 3 places that were marked illegibility that should have been translated. Plus, there was one entire section that was not translated. Additionally, I found 4 more translation errors on the remaining 2 documents. Then, after I received the corrected translation, I double-checked everything and found that the translator again failed to fix one of my previously requested corrections. I didn't have any of those issues with your far superior translations, Laura Lee. I was grateful for all the advice that came with the translations you gave, such as making sure I got the correct documents and what to expect with them.
Which of the documents for your Italian citizenship did you need to have apostilled?
First of all, it's important to understand that an apostille is like an international notary that authenticates your original record. Apostles are recognized internationally, and they prove to the Italian consulate that your documents are valid. The only records that did not require an apostille were my grandfather's and grandmother's official birth records from Italy, the naturalization records. Also, my non-bloodline records, which included my father's and husband's birth records, did not require apostilles. I needed apostilles for all other documents that were used to prove my Italian lineage. But I'd like to mention that before you can apply for an apostille for records from New York City, you also need a letter of exemplification. That's yet another step required when you need to send your New York City vital record to another city department for certification. Once your original document and letter of exemplification are returned to you, then you can send for the apostille to the Secretary of State. The final document you receive has an apostille attached to your original document, and that is what I presented to the consulate in Houston during Italian citizenship appointment. You must not separate the certified document from the apostille. If you do, it will be invalid.
Were there any additional forms that you were required to complete with your application?
Yes, there were. After months of research and preparation, I thought I had everything I needed for the appointment, but I was mistaken. During my consulate appointment, the administrative officer informed me that I needed a certified birth certificate for my husband. I was also given a form called a declaration of divorce form in Italian that I was told to fill out, sign, and return by mail. Additionally, I needed to get a special record of no appeal for my divorce, which also required a translation and an apostille. Fortunately, I was able to order that record after my appointment and mail it in. Then when I received the certificate of no appeal, one of the names on that certificate was misspelled, and I had to send for yet another correction before I could have that translated and request the apostille.
Walk us through your Italian citizenship application appointment day.
It was quite an experience. You need to bring a sense of humor to that appointment. First, I checked in at the consulate, and I didn't have to wait too long before I was called to another window, and the administrative officer got right down to business. She asked if I was applying for Italian citizenship. I said yes, and right away I was asked for the payment in the form of a money order. The application fee is posted in euros on the website, so you need to make sure to convert it into US dollars at the current exchange rate. A week before my appointment, I rechecked the website for the application fee and found it had increased by $16 because of the exchange rate. I already had a money order made out, so I emailed the consulate for their advice, and fortunately, they said I could bring the balance in cash or with a second money order. Then I had to show my current passport and driver's license. Then next I was asked for the application forms. I was applying for Italian citizenship through my maternal grandfather, so the administrator asked for my grandfather's Italian birth record, followed by my grandmother's birth record, and then she asked for the grandparents' marriage certificate. Then the administrator looked through the records in detail and made note of every word, name, and date. Then she asked for my grandfather's immigration documents. I had hoped that all my documents would be perfect, but she wasn't happy that the typing on the document was almost illegible. Then she asked for the USCIS copy of my grandfather's certificate of citizenship. She pointed out a discrepancy between the marriage dates on the petition for citizenship and their marriage certificate that I didn't catch, but fortunately she accepted it. I was glad I didn't have to make yet another correction. And then she asked for my grandfather's death certificate. Well, I nervously took out those forms that I knew had name and date discrepancies, and right away she noticed the name Russell instead of Orazio, and she asked, "What is this Russell?" Then she saw the 23 May 1905 for his birth date and said, "What is this birth date?" I tried to give her some of the other documents to show where the dates had come from, but she didn't take them. All she said was, "The death certificate completes the life of my grandfather, but it isn't required for the application." So I did all of that worrying for nothing. Then she put all the documents I gave her in a pile, and then she asked for my father's birth certificate. Fortunately, I had that with me and passed it to her, but I didn't have it translated nor apostles. Then she realized that I was applying through my mother, so she said, okay, she needed my mother's birth certificate instead with that translation and apostle. So I passed my mother's documents to her, which satisfied that requirement. Then she asked for an application form number 4 for my mother, but I didn't have that one filled out. I only filled out one for my grandfather. Then she explained to me that the citizenship passed from my grandfather, then through my mother, so if I wanted to obtain citizenship that I needed to fill out a form 4 for her as well. Fortunately, she said that wouldn't be difficult to take care of. I could submit that later. Then she asked for my parents' marriage documents. Everything was fine with those. Then she asked for my birth certificate. And that's where I got surprised. The administrative officer identified the translation of my birth certificate didn't match the birth certificate I submitted with the apostille. We had a little conversation about it and agreed that the document must be corrected, and I had to order the correct document and have it translated. That was my mistake because the state of Virginia has 2 different applications. The first application allows you to request the long form birth certificate and apostille together in one step. The other form is for the birth certificate without an apostille, so I ordered one of each. And when I got the birth certificate without the apostille, I sent that for translating. Even though it was a long form birth certificate, it wasn't the certified extract long form that I needed. So that error was due to my inexperience. So after the appointment, I had to reorder my birth certificate with the apostille again and then get that translated. Then she asked for my marriage documents. I gave her my current marriage license with the apostille and translation. Then she asked me for the marriage certificate. I was flustered and told her I didn't think I needed the certificate, that I only needed the license. She explained that the license was only a document that granted permission by the state of Nevada for us to be married, but it didn't show the actual marriage date, which was on the certificate. I previously obtained the marriage certificate and had it apostilled, but I left it at home because I didn't think it was needed. Again, another error due to my inexperience, but I could turn that in later. Then she asked for my husband's birth certificate in long form. I guess she wanted to make sure he was the father of my son. At that point, I just sighed because I didn't bring that record with me either. I said something along the lines of, I feel so stupid because I was preparing for this meeting for over a year and now I didn't have all the correct information. So she finally made a kind remark that, it's okay, you're now on Italian soil and it's a different world. And she also mentioned the Italian bureaucracy. I said I would be glad to come back if needed, and she replied that I might not have to return and that she might be able to work out something. As you told me, Lucia, you know by now that it's the Italian way to say no first, point out the negatives, and then work out something. So I highly recommend bringing all the documents that you have to your Italian citizenship application appointment. It's better to have more documents than you need than to be missing something on your appointment day. Then she asked me for 2 additional documents which I didn't know I needed. She wasn't surprised, though, that I didn't have them. These documents were some bureaucratic details the Italian consulate needed regarding the divorce. The first document was a form to request the registration of divorce decree with the city of Leonforte, where my grandfather was born. Fortunately, this form was both in Italian and English, and the administrator gave me a few tips on how to fill it out. The second form was in Italian and is titled, I can't pronounce the Italian, but it's Dichiarazione Sostitutiva dell'atto di notorietà. She gave me some help filling out this one as well. Next, she said I also needed to obtain a certificate of no appeal for the divorce. The Italian government evidently wants absolute positive proof that you're not married to 2 people at the same time. The administrative officer half apologetically told me I needed this document even though most states don't provide it. So she said any written statement from the court or the Los Angeles archives would work. Then she made some remarks about the Italian bureaucracy. Finally, she noticed that I included my son's name on my application, so she asked for his birth certificate, which I gave her with the apostille and translation. Thank goodness these documents were fine. Then I held my breath, waiting to hear what she had to say about my application. Her final remarks were, "The most important papers were about my grandfather and my mother through whom I was applying for citizenship." Then she said my application required additional documents to complete my file. At first my heart sunk, but then she said I had enough documentation to open a case. She would put my application on hold until I could mail her the other required documents. I was so relieved that she accepted the most important documents, and I only needed to order a few more. That would save me another trip to Houston. Then she typed up a letter with a file number and a list of documents that I needed to mail to her all at once. We both signed that letter, and she gave me a copy. She would keep the other documents for about 4 months until my son turned 18. I told her I understood and that if I didn't have everything to send her before my son turned 18, that I would leave out his birth certificate document and he wouldn't be eligible for Italian citizenship along with my application. So the clock was ticking again. That concluded the hour-and-a-half appointment. I left the consulate, got an Uber, and went to the nearest gelato place. When I got home, I spent the day putting together the remaining documents, making calls, and priority mailing out requests for documents and corrections with priority mail return envelopes. Fortunately, that didn't take much work. Regarding one of the documents I received, a name was incorrectly spelled, so once again I had to quickly fill out yet another correction application with priority return envelopes and fees to have that corrected, then apostilled and translated.
Lucia, how long did it take you to receive a response from the Italian consulate in Houston about the acceptance of your citizenship application after you submitted the additional documents?
After the incredible appointment experience, I mailed the final corrected and translated documents to the consulate just shy of a year from when I started. That gave me only 2 months to spare before my son's 18th birthday. It took the Houston consulate 4 months to notify me of my Italian citizenship. I received an anticlimactic email that simply stated, "This is to inform you that your application for Italian citizenship has been recognized and processed. You and your son are now registered as Italian citizens with this consulate general."
The entire process is very time consuming and requires a financial commitment. So overall, how much time and money did you invest in your citizenship application?
I decided to pursue Italian citizenship 1 week after returning from my trip to Sicily and Campania, where you and I met to do family heritage research in 2017. I began the process on June 30th, 2017, when I ordered my first document, and I submitted the final documents June 7th, 2018. I received notification of both my and my son's Italian citizenship on October 18th, 2018. So from start to finish, the entire process took about 1 year, plus a 4-month processing period. The total cost for 24 different documents, including corrections, 12 apostils, postage, translations, and the $368.70 application fee, which was 30 euros at the time, was about $2,300, plus travel costs to Houston that required hotel, airfare, Uber, and meals. That didn't include the time I spent on the project. Keep in mind that costs can vary depending on the number of documents you have and if you require expedited service. I also wound up with several duplicate documents, which added to the cost. Again, that was due to my inexperience, but also my desire to have duplicate records available so I could quickly order the next ones in line.
What would you do differently now, knowing what you know in hindsight?
If I could go back in time when my parents were still alive, I would have done everything possible to obtain copies of documents such as their birth certificates and marriage certificates, and possibly my grandparents' records. Sometimes situations occur after the death of your parents that preclude access to those documents, whether they are lost, destroyed, or otherwise not available. And while they might not be the long-form official documents required for the citizenship application, the names, dates, and locations on those records would have helped significantly in the record search and document corrections. So for anyone interested in family heritage and Italian citizenship, I strongly recommend trying to get your hands on those documents. Also, over a year, it was easily a part-time job working on my Italian citizenship. And while I enjoy doing family heritage research, if I didn't have the free time, I definitely would have had a professional handle the processing and ordering of the records. It took a lot of time, research, cost, and effort to track down document locations and dates. Also, it was incredibly time-consuming to identify the proper agencies and fill out the paperwork to obtain those documents. If I had a professional involved earlier to help me with the document procurement, it might have cost a bit more, but it would have saved a lot of time and stress. Additionally, a professional might have found that I was eligible to pursue Italian citizenship through a different grandparent whose records might not have been as complicated and time-consuming as the grandparent I used. For example, I chose my maternal grandparent through whom to claim Italian citizenship only because I was able to locate his immigration information. His records had different names and several different birth dates, which greatly complicated the process and took a lot more time.
What did you learn going through the entire application process from start to finish?
I learned there are a lot of moving parts and not to expect perfection. One thing I wouldn't change, though, is working with you digging up roots in the boots. I can't thank you enough for the excellent translations, astute observations of document corrections I needed, and all of the insightful advice, dozens of emails, and support along the way. Ending on a happy Italian note, I received a postcard in the mail from the Comune di Leonforte recently for the Italian parliamentary elections. Unfortunately, the card arrived on the day of the election. My son got his election postcard a week after I received mine. That was so Italian.
Congratulations to both you and your son, Lucia, and thank you for being with us today to share with everybody your personal experience.